He loved his family and loved serving this state and our country. He dedicated his life to our country.
Before the tributes poured in and the headlines settled, one question resurfaced that had followed Senator Lindsey Graham for decades. It wasn't about his political career, his biggest decisions, or the battles he fought in Washington. Instead, it centered on the deeply private life he always kept out of public view. For nearly 25 years in the U.S. Senate, Graham remained one of the few high-profile politicians who was never seen attending major events with a spouse, never announced an engagement, and rarely addressed questions about his personal life. Whenever the topic came up, he usually brushed it aside with humor and moved on. But after his unexpected passing at the age of 71, that long-standing silence gave way to renewed public curiosity, with many people revisiting the mystery he had carefully kept to himself for years. The truth behind Lindsey Graham's bachelor life. For years, people kept asking the same question: why did Lindsey Graham never get married? Rumors came and went, but the real answer stayed hidden. Then the person who knew him better than anyone else, his younger sister, finally shared the story. What she revealed had nothing to do with politics or public life. It was a deeply personal sacrifice that began long before Graham ever entered the U.S. Senate. Growing up in a small South Carolina town, Lindsey Olin Graham was born on July 9, 1955, in central South Carolina. His parents, Millie and Florence James Graham, owned a local business called the Sanitary Cafe. It was more than just a restaurant. It also included a bar, pool hall, and liquor store, and for many years, the family lived in small rooms behind the business. As the cafe became more successful, the family moved into a nearby house. Even then, young Lindsey spent much of his time helping his parents at the family business. Those early years taught him the value of hard work, responsibility, and discipline, qualities that would stay with him for the rest of his life. No one could have guessed that the boy serving customers in a small-town bar would one day become one of America's best-known senators. A tragedy that changed everything. Lindsey became the first member of his family to attend college, enrolling at the University of South Carolina. Like most students, he expected a normal future, but life had other plans. In 1976, when Lindsey was just 20 years old, his mother died after battling Hodgkin lymphoma. Only 15 months later, another heartbreaking blow followed. His father suffered a fatal heart attack. In just over a year, Lindsey and his 11-year-old sister Darlene lost both of their parents. There were no wealthy relatives waiting to take over, or no large family ready to raise a grieving little girl. Instead, the responsibility fell on a young college student who was still trying to build his own future. That moment quietly changed the direction of Lindsey Graham's life forever. Becoming more than a brother. Rather than send Darlene to live somewhere else, Lindsey made a life-changing decision. He chose to raise her himself. While completing college and later attending law school, he became much more than an older brother. He became her guardian, her protector, and the closest thing she had to a parent. Friends from those years have often said that tragedy forced Lindsey to grow up almost overnight. Instead of enjoying a typical college life, he was worrying about school bills, family responsibilities, and helping a young girl recover from unimaginable loss. That powerful sense of duty became the foundation of everything he would do later in life. Balancing family and military service. After law school, Graham joined the U.S. Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps in 1982. To make sure Darlene received military health care and family benefits, he legally adopted his own sister. According to Darlene, from that point forward, Lindsey simply became her parent. He wasn't just helping financially, He handled the everyday challenges of raising a teenager while building a demanding legal career in the military. His service eventually took him to Rhein-Main Air Base in Germany, where he worked as both a military prosecutor and defense attorney. Even while stationed overseas, he stayed closely involved in Darlene's life, returning home whenever possible and relying on trusted family friends to help while he was away. People who knew the family say Darlene never lacked support or guidance because Lindsey made sure she always came first. The sacrifice behind his personal life. Taking care of his sister left little room for anything else. While many people in their 20s were dating, getting married, and starting families, Lindsey was focused on raising a young girl who had suddenly become his responsibility. Years later, Darlene finally addressed the question that had followed her brother for decades. She explained that Lindsey never got married because his attention was completely devoted to raising her. He was trying to finish school, begin his career, and care for a young sister at the same time. For him, family came before everything else. Today, Darlene has a family of her own and has continued living in South Carolina, not far from the place where her brother stepped into the role of parent when she needed him most of all. A bond that never changed. Even after Lindsey entered national politics, their connection remained strong. Before announcing his presidential campaign in 2015, Lindsey and Darlene stopped together at their parents' graves in central South Carolina. It was a quiet visit that reflected the promise he had carried since losing them decades earlier. The night before the announcement, Darlene reportedly walked into the old pool room above their childhood home for the first time in nearly 30 years. Friends said the memories overwhelmed her, bringing back thoughts of the parents they had both lost far too soon. It was another reminder that, despite all the attention surrounding politics, family remained at the center of Lindsey Graham's life. From small-town lawyer to Washington. After his sister was grown, Graham turned his full attention to public service. He worked as an assistant attorney in Oconee County and later became the city attorney for Central South Carolina. He won a seat in the South Carolina House of Representatives in 1992, moved to the U.S. House in 1994, and was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2002, succeeding Strom Thurmond. Alongside his political career, he completed 33 years of Air Force service before retiring from the Air Force Reserve in 2015. In Washington, Graham became especially well known for his close friendship with Arizona Senator John McCain. Together, they worked on defense and national security issues, building a partnership that shaped much of Graham's reputation on Capitol Hill. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Senator Joe Lieberman became so close in Washington that people around Capitol Hill nicknamed them the Three Amigos. Even though they came from different political backgrounds, they often worked together on defense and foreign policy, earning respect for their bipartisan approach. McCain often joked about Graham's personal life. During one interview, he laughed that Graham had dated many beautiful women over the years, but he had never seen him get anywhere close to marriage. It became a friendly joke between them whenever reporters asked why Graham had remained single. Their friendship proved to be much deeper than politics. In 2017, after John McCain was diagnosed with brain cancer, Graham was the one who shared the heartbreaking news with fellow senators. After speaking with McCain, Graham told reporters that if anyone could fight such a disease, it was his longtime friend. Even after McCain passed away in 2018, Graham continued honoring that friendship. He reportedly worked behind the scenes to arrange for Ivanka Trump to attend McCain's funeral, despite the strained relationship between the McCain family and President Donald Trump. Before making those arrangements, Graham is said to have received approval from McCain's widow. The same independent mindset that shaped Graham's friendships also defined his political career. At a time when Washington was becoming more divided, he often chose to work with Democrats whenever he believed it could lead to real results instead of endless political fights. That approach earned him both praise and criticism. Supporters viewed him as a practical leader who cared more about solving problems than scoring political points. Critics inside his own party, however, believed he compromised too often and gave away too much. No issue highlighted that divide more than immigration.
During the mid-2000s, Graham teamed up with Democratic Senator Ted Kennedy to push for a major immigration reform plan. Their proposal combined stronger border security with updates to the legal immigration system, while also creating a strict process that would allow many undocumented immigrants already living in the United States to earn legal status. The goal was to solve a problem that had challenged lawmakers for decades instead of delaying it once again. The proposal quickly became one of the most debated issues in the country. Many conservatives argued that allowing undocumented immigrants to remain in America under any circumstances was simply another form of amnesty. Graham strongly disagreed. He insisted that successful immigration reform required both secure borders and a fair legal system. In his view, enforcing the law and showing compassion were not opposing ideas, they could work together. Years later, Graham returned to the issue as one of the leading Republican members of the Senate's bipartisan Gang of Eight, helping negotiate another sweeping immigration bill introduced in 2013. After months of negotiations, lawmakers produced legislation that included billions of dollars for border security, visa reforms, stricter employment verification, and a long path toward legal status and eventual citizenship for qualified undocumented immigrants. Although the Senate approved the bill with support from both parties, it stalled in the House of Representatives and never became law. Even without becoming law, Graham's role strengthened his reputation as one of the Republican Party's strongest voices for immigration reform. His influence extended far beyond domestic policy. Drawing from his experience as an Air Force lawyer and reserve officer, Graham consistently argued that America needed a strong military and an active role in world affairs. Over time, he became known as one of the Senate's most outspoken national security advocates. Instead of relying only on reports from Washington, Graham regularly traveled overseas to see global conflicts for himself. During the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, he made repeated visits to meet American troops, military commanders, diplomats, and allied leaders. Those first-hand experiences shaped many of his speeches and policy positions back in Washington. His overseas visits continued long after those wars faded from the headlines. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Graham became one of Congress's strongest supporters of continued U.S. assistance. He traveled to Ukraine several times, meeting with government officials and publicly backing the country's efforts to defend itself. Graham repeatedly argued that supporting Ukraine was more than an act of generosity. He believed it was a long-term investment in global security and the protection of democratic nations. Whether discussing terrorism, NATO, China, Russia, or conflicts in the Middle East, his message remained largely unchanged throughout his Senate career. He consistently promoted military strength, strong alliances, and an active American presence on the world stage. Supporters admired his consistency and experience, while critics argued that he was too willing to support military involvement overseas. Regardless of which side people took, few questioned that his views stayed remarkably steady over the years. Yet, despite decades in public office and constant attention on his political career, one question never disappeared. Unlike many other national political figures, Lindsey Graham never married and never had children. A personal mystery that continued to spark public curiosity throughout his time in Washington. His overseas visits continued long after those wars faded from the headlines. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Graham became one of Congress's strongest supporters of continued U.S. assistance. He traveled to Ukraine several times, meeting with government officials and publicly backing the country's efforts to defend itself. Graham repeatedly argued that supporting Ukraine was more than an act of generosity. He believed it was a long-term investment in global security and the protection of democratic nations. Whether discussing terrorism, NATO, China, Russia, or conflicts in the Middle East, his message remained largely unchanged throughout his Senate career. He consistently promoted military strength, strong alliances, and an active American presence on the world stage. Supporters admired his consistency and experience, while critics argued that he was too willing to support military involvement overseas. Regardless of which side people took, few questioned that his views stayed remarkably steady over the years. Yet, despite decades in public office and constant attention on his political career, one question never disappeared. Unlike many other national political figures, Lindsey Graham never married and never had children, a personal mystery that continued to spark public curiosity throughout his time in Washington. For years, Lindsey Graham's personal life remained one of Washington's biggest mysteries. Reporters, political analysts, and even ordinary voters often wondered what life in the White House would look like if a lifelong bachelor ever became president. When Graham briefly ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 2016, one question followed him everywhere: who would be First Lady if he won? Instead of avoiding the topic, Graham usually answered with a smile and a joke, turning an awkward question into a lighthearted moment. But behind the humor was a much deeper story that very few people truly understood. Unlike many politicians, Graham never built a traditional family. He poured nearly all his adult life into military service, public office, and the responsibilities he had taken on long before entering politics. Whether people praised him for standing by his convictions or criticized him for changing positions, one thing remained true: he was never afraid to surprise people. That willingness to challenge expectations became one of the defining features of his career. His political journey reflected that same unpredictability. During the 2016 Republican primary, Graham was one of Donald Trump's toughest critics. After Trump proposed restricting Muslims from entering the United States, Graham strongly condemned the idea and even described Trump as a race-baiting bigot. The feud quickly became national news, especially after Trump publicly shared Graham's personal cell phone number during a campaign rally. Few imagined that their relationship would change so dramatically. Following the death of his close friend, Senator John McCain, in 2018, Graham gradually became one of Trump's closest allies in the Senate. The transformation surprised both supporters and critics, reshaping his political image almost as much as the hidden story of his personal life had shaped the man himself. From 2019 through 2021, he led the Senate Judiciary Committee and played a major role in confirming federal judges. Later, beginning in 2025, he chaired the Senate Budget Committee while continuing to influence debates on national security and foreign policy until the very end of his career. Then, everything changed. On July 11, 2026, Graham passed away at the age of 71 after what his office initially described as a sudden illness. Medical findings later suggested that a torn aorta caused by hardened arteries was the likely reason for his death, a condition that can remain unnoticed for years before becoming fatal without warning. The news shocked many Americans. Only days earlier, Graham had returned from an overseas trip and was expected to appear in several high-profile interviews that same week. His sudden passing left colleagues, friends, and political rivals struggling to process the loss. Tributes poured in from every corner of American politics. Meghan McCain, the daughter of his longtime friend John McCain, shared an emotional message describing Graham as someone their family considered one of their own. She remembered how he remained by their side after her father's death, continuing to visit, call, and offer support long after the public attention had faded. Other members of the McCain family expressed similar feelings, saying they had lost someone who had been part of their lives for nearly 30 years.
As many remembered Graham's political legacy, another detail resurfaced. He remained the only sitting U.S. senator who had never married. For decades, that fact had sparked endless speculation. But after his death, the real explanation finally came from the one person who knew him better than almost anyone else: his younger sister, Darlene Graham Nordone. Her words painted a picture very different from the rumors that had followed him throughout his career. Now a mother of two and someone who helps people with disabilities find meaningful employment, Darlene explained that her brother made a life-changing promise when they were both young. After the deaths of their parents, Lindsey assured her that he would always take care of her, and he kept that responsibility for the rest of his life. She never saw him treat that responsibility as a burden. Instead, he embraced it completely, even if it meant giving up dreams of building his own family. The jokes he made about being a lifelong bachelor hid a commitment that few people ever understood. His official obituary reflected that extraordinary journey. Still in his early 20s, Graham lost his both parents within 15 months, leaving him to care for his younger sister while finishing college. Despite carrying that enormous responsibility, he completed his education, attended law school, served in the military, and eventually spent decades representing South Carolina in the United States Senate. In a remarkable turn of events, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster later appointed Darlene to complete the remainder of her brother's Senate term. Taking the oath of office in Washington under her legal name, Darlene Graham, she told reporters that her brother had always stood beside her when she needed him most in life. Serving in his place, she said, was her way of honoring everything he did for her. It was a powerful moment that brought their story full circle. More than 50 years earlier, inside a small-town family business, a young college student had promised his grieving 11-year-old sister that she would never face life alone. Decades later, she stood in the very office he had devoted his life to, carrying forward the legacy he had spent a lifetime building. In the end, the truth was far different from the speculation that had surrounded Lindsey Graham for so many years. There was no hidden marriage, no secret relationship, no dramatic scandal waiting to be uncovered. The real story was far more meaningful.